You know, we place a lot of faith in our professionals. And that's not to say that it's misplaced, but they don't always have the answers. You know, there's plenty of stories of people with no training solving medical mysteries that have doctors stomped, or average Joes saving the day. And sometimes that's exactly what it takes. An unwillingness to accept the answer they give you. A conviction that you know what you know. And when you pair this with a mother's love, well, you have the April Holt story.
It was not a suicide. I didn't have any doubt in my mind. Donovan, her husband, calls me and he sounds a bit frantic, and he's like, I found April. She wasn't breathing in the shower and she's in the ambulance on the way to the hospital.
Welcome back to the Stranger Than Fiction podcast. Let's get to it. April Holt was an up-and-coming TikTok influencer who shared her experiences and her life with her audience. She encouraged them to stay positive, and that was kind of her brand. April was 29 years old. She lived in Tennessee. She was married and had 2 kids, one of which stayed with her. On her TikTok channel, she shared stories with her more than 200,000 followers about her life, personal struggles, and just overall candid moments that made her followers feel like they really knew her. She had a very relatable approach, and she rode the wave of like spirituality and people trying to center themselves and the thing about manifesting the type of life that you want. Now, she started this quest in 2018, but her channel really started to gain traction in 2020 during the pandemic. Most of her discussion centered around her marriage to Donovan Holt, which, like almost any relationship, was full of ups and downs. But what would be just day-to-day life in a private relationship was more of a TikTok reality show for her followers. Because of course, simple issues become exaggerated when everybody's watching.
You're so out of breath.
I am out of breath. But honestly, if we weren't friends first, it wouldn't have lasted. Like, that's been the base of the whole relationship. The foundation was that we were friends. And so even through the bullshit, we can joke around, and
He really is like my bestest friend ever.
the bestest.
The best friend I could ever ask for. And I married him.
But April's biggest allure was that she always seemed to put on a brave face for the camera. Regardless of what was going on, she remained positive, and it always seemed like her and her husband were on the same page. They were always shown smiling through adversity and displaying this unshakable faith that tomorrow would be better than today. Now, audiences got to see her family go through different financial struggles, as well as take joy in her accomplishments and wins. They experienced the dramatic ups and downs of her life and her revelations as her life changed in accordance with her TikTok fame. Now, initially, it seemed like the couple was all in it together, but eventually, April and Donovan would split up and go through a period of co-parenting. But on camera, they gave the impression that they were still best friends, and regardless of what was going on, they still had each other's best interests in mind.
Okay, so the story is that we are getting divorced because it was our decision. It's my best friend. I still love her to death. Like, we still got a child together. We still gonna be hanging out. I'm probably
All
gonna
the
see
time.
her most days of the week, but at the end of the day, we got shit to do. That's it. You feel me? She has a path to go. I got a path to go, but our paths are parallel, and we always gonna be next to each other.
Yeah.
And who's to say what's gonna happen in the future? All that we know is right now. Right now, it's the best. I mean, real talk, it's the best decision for both of us. For her to
It
do what
is.
she needs to
It
do, for
is.
me to do what I need to do. So
So we can grow and heal
that's
and
it.
elevate. No hard feelings. This is not a messy divorce or anything like that. We don't do that. This is, like I said, like he said, this is my best friend at the end of the day. He has been before the relationship, before the marriage, before the kid. So nothing's gonna change that. So
Like, look at her, bro. Like, I would never lose this forever.
So in 2021, they separated, but after a little time apart, they decided to give the marriage another try. But by 2023, they were back at it, and this time, April told Donovan that she wanted a divorce. And this is where the story takes a very dark turn. Just 2 weeks after telling her husband she wanted a divorce, April was found by her 7-year-old son unconscious on the bathroom floor with a plastic bag duct taped over her head. Of course, they called 911. She was rushed to the hospital, where she was later pronounced dead, and the medical examiner declared it was a suicide. Case closed. However, Jamie Dickerson, April's mom was not going for that. She knew her daughter and knew she would never take her own life. And this is the moment when Jamie set out on a mission to solve the crime herself. She launched her own investigation, spending hours a day trying to find out who killed her daughter and bring them to justice. And the shocking things she discovered along the way led her down a path that made the husband the prime suspect. So first off, Jamie recalled how strange Donovan was acting on the day this all occurred. Now, initially, she could have chalked this up to just the fact that both of them were dealing with an enormous tragedy. And it's hard to guess or assume how people will deal with stress. But Donovan did some weird things at the time that had Jamie kind of concerned. For example, he gave Jamie April's phone and told her at the hospital that she could be in charge of making all medical decisions.
The day that I got a call from Donovan was July 29th of 2023. When he called to tell me that April was found not breathing in the shower and that she was in the hospital on the way to she was in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, I immediately felt like something was off because she had just texted me an hour and a half prior and said that she would meet me at church the next day. So I really didn't understand what had happened. I didn't know if she fell and hit her head or if she just wasn't feeling good, or I really had no idea what any of that meant. I just had a feeling in my gut that something was wrong. And when I arrived at this hospital to find that she was on life support, I was in utter shock. I didn't have any clue that this was the extent of the injury that had taken place. I knew then, though, that something wasn't right. This was not adding up. Donovan was sitting there rocking like and holding his head like he didn't want to tell me what had happened. And then he had this story that didn't make sense, saying her throat was hurting and she wasn't acting like herself. But like I said, she had just texted me an hour and a half prior and was perfectly fine. So none of it added up. I knew from that moment that something was not right.
He also left the hospital several times to go back to the apartment while his wife was seemingly fighting for her life. And this was before the police ever went there, and he really never gave any explanation. Then Jamie found out that a week before April's death, Donovan had pawned her wedding ring. Then there was the story of what Donovan said happened that day and the story of what their child said happened that day. You see, Donovan told the police and anybody else that would listen that on the day April died, he was in the kitchen making lunch for his son, and after a good amount of time had passed, he asked his son to go check on his mom because she'd been in the bathroom for a while. And that is where their 7-year-old son found his mother unconscious on the floor with the bag duct taped over her head. April's son, however, told a much different story. He said his parents had been arguing, and like any other kid, he was eavesdropping, he was laying on the floor, staring under the door jamb. He said he heard tussling, and then he saw what he thought was someone falling to the ground. At that point, he jumped up, ran to his room, and he waited there until his father came and got him later. Now, why this version of events was overlooked by the police is beyond me. Then Jamie got April's autopsy report. The autopsy listed blunt force trauma, bruising around her mouth like she'd been smothered, and a number of other findings that pointed to more of an assault than someone taking their own life. And when you take into account the autopsy report and April's son's telling of what happened that day, kind of points to Donovan. So while the police had concluded their investigation and ruled her death a suicide, Jamie was still fighting, and she takes her battle to social media. She starts posting videos on TikTok about things she's discovering or the failures of the investigation, and her videos start to gain traction and the community gets involved. Then suddenly a gag order is issued by the judge, so she can no longer talk about the case on TikTok. But this is a mother who has lost a child, and she is doing everything she can to find out what's happened. So it's not like a gag order is gonna stop her from trying to get to the bottom of things. So what she does is she starts posting videos with duct tape over her mouth, and she writes messages on the duct tape instead of actually saying things out loud. Now, eventually, Jamie files enough complaints and harasses enough people to convince the police department to do an internal investigation on the investigation of April Holt's death. And they come back with a 47-page report. And in that report, there are 2 hits for Donovan's fingerprints on the duct tape that was used in April's death. And this information was completely overlooked by the police during the initial investigation. Now, granted, Donovan's fingerprints on the duct tape could be explained for a number of reasons. For starters, they do live in the house together, and it wasn't a new roll of duct tape, so he could have touched that tape at any point in time. He also told police that when he found April, he ripped the bag off and tried to pull the duct tape off so he would have, his fingerprints on the tape that way as well. But if nothing else, that's enough information for them to at least have looked at Donovan as a potential suspect. I mean, it definitely warranted them doing their own due diligence and working to either confirm or exclude Donovan from the suspect pool. But because they never looked at it as a crime or a murder, they didn't have any reason to. And for Jamie, in light of all of the other things she had uncovered, the fingerprints were like the smoking gun. So she took all the information she had and she confronted Donovan. She told him, you can either tell me what happened or I'm gonna take all this information to the cold case department and they're gonna reopen the case. Donovan gets spooked, so he agrees to talk with her. Donovan agrees to tell her everything. So they have a phone call that Jamie records, and in that phone call, Donovan confesses to killing his wife. Jamie takes that information to the police and they reopen an investigation, and eventually they're able to get a confession from Donovan themselves, and they arrest him and charge him with reckless homicide. And that's kind of where this case stands right now. Now, Jamie is still fighting, trying to up the charges against Donovan to, I'm assuming, something more of second-degree murder, but she did find out the man that killed her daughter, and she is working her damnedest to bring him to justice. Now, I assume there are a number of reasons the police department did such a shoddy job on the investigation, negligence probably being the main one. But I will say that April posted a lot of things about the struggles she was going through. She was really candid on camera. She talked about depression. She had some discussions about suicide, not necessarily about herself committing suicide, just about, the things that people go through. I mean, depression's a real thing. And I think when the police saw that, with also the story that her husband was telling, they were just like, oh yeah, she obviously killed herself. And they were ready to just, brush everything under the rug. They didn't even look at Donovan as a suspect ever. And I think in almost every instance when a husband or a wife dies, they always look at the spouse as a suspect. And in this instance, they didn't even think about it. They were very quick to just brush it all up under the rug and say that April obviously killed herself. But I'm happy to see that because of Jamie's just determination not to take the answer that they gave her, she was able to get to the truth of this, because this could have easily gone another way. I mean, they'd already ruled this a suicide, and that would have been the end of it. And I think maybe the worst part of it all is that their 7-year-old son was still living with the dad. He would have been living and growing up with the father that killed his mother. And this is the same man that, and I guess I should preface all this by saying that he has not been convicted of this crime. He has been charged with it. So although all signs seem to point to him, I'm not gonna assume that he's guilty, but if he is guilty, this is a man that killed his wife and then sent his 7-year-old child into the bathroom to discover his dead mom. And that just takes a special kind of evil to do. And if he'd gotten away with it, that kid would have grown up with a man that was capable of doing that. So who knows what would have happened later on in life. That will conclude the story for today. I want to thank all you guys for watching. If you are not subscribed, subscribe to the channel. And next week we will be bringing out more videos that are stranger than fiction.